Hey, how's it going? I'm Nick, the host of the Ekho Academy podcast, a podcast where we tap into the world's collective wisdom and experience to learn how we can be more resilient. In today's episode, I speak with Ellie Rich-Poole. Ellie is a recruitment coach who coaches individuals looking for a new role, a new career, or transitioning into a new country. The COVID-19 pandemic has caused many of us to spiral down the rabbit hole of uncertainty and insecurity, especially when it comes to our careers. It's natural to doubt yourself during this period, wondering whether you have the skills needed to survive, let alone excel in the new normal. My conversation with Ellie revolved around the topic of first evaluating your strengths during times like this and then utilizing it to your advantage. Ellie provided simple strategies that I think you're going to want to put into practice. So I've no doubt you'll find this episode useful. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Ellie Rich-Poole. Alrighty. Well, I suppose like before we even start like the podcast in general, like because I know like this topic that we're going to discuss on is really evaluating our strengths during a crisis. But I suppose I'm more curious on why, and we can have a small mini discussion on this, and that's like, why do we think periods like this pandemic, for example, is a great time to really pause and reflect on the things we're doing and what we want to be doing?
Mm-hmm. So for me, it's almost. I feel like I've almost been forced into it. Actually, I don't know about you, Nick, but I think because everything's been so out of the ordinary, you can sort of throw yourself into things and carry on for so long, and then certainly I know from my experience, I hit a wall, and then I guess really sort of hit a bit of burnout. And talking to my friends, my clients, my whole network, it's been a really common theme, and people are just saying, I don't understand why I'm so tired. And then you sort of stop and think and go, well, I suppose we have basically just done 12 weeks of homeschooling without stopping, without a holiday, whilst working, with no childcare, or whatever anyone's situation, with or without children. It's just been so intense that I think it's almost forced us to just stop. I don't know anyone that's just sort of sailed through it and felt normal and happy. I think everybody's had their own challenges, and I think when you get to that point, there's that sort of enforced pause where you stop, because if you don't, you probably your body will probably force you to stop eventually anyway.
Yeah, I know. It's funny for me because I think this pandemic is the only time that I've truly appreciated people who don't have a routine, because they seem to have adjusted so well to this change. They're just like, oh, la di da, like whatever. Like I can just figure out what works best for me. Whereas for me, I'm like, oh no, I have this plan of how I like to go about my day before things start to get unproductive or inefficient. Whereas these people, many of whom are my friends, seem to adjust really well. And I think, sometimes when you go through big changes and big challenges like this, it's always the people who are most flexible that adapt the quickest. And I think that's one of my biggest learning lessons.
It's a good point, actually. I hadn't thought about it like that, but actually the flexibility, and I suppose that comes into resilience as well, doesn't it? Because resilience, people often think that just means about being almost sturdy and they can cope with things. But actually, the dictionary definition of resilience goes back to the ability to flex with things, almost like a tree. You can sort of wave in the breeze. And actually, to be great at being resilient, I suppose you do need that flexibility, and that's true. And I think some people are better at it, but then I think some people probably have more freedom to be allowed to be flexible. So depending on our setting. So, for example, a friend of mine, she doesn't work, a lucky lady, and so she doesn't work and she doesn't have children. And don't get me wrong, there's challenges for everything. Loneliness or sort of boredom. But by not having any fixed demands on you, like you must be on this, this webinar at this time, you must have your child do this at this time, I think it's easier to be flexible. And then for others, it's maybe harder when you suddenly have all these things drop in your diary. And I don't know about you, but sort of a huge number of Zoom calls, which are great on one hand for the interaction, not so good if you just want some breathing space and your diary is chock full of them. So yeah, I think some people some people find flexibility easier anyway, but then I think some of us have been blessed with a freer diary during this time as well.
Yeah, I agree. And it's funny because during this pandemic, when I kind of watch all these videos or go to these webinars, and you see how people talk about pretty much the same issue of pandemic and resilience, mm-hmm. and being flexible and adapting to change. Everyone kind of prescribes different ideologies to pretty much the same challenge, which is why for me I think it's always very important, and maybe I'm part of the problem when I have podcasts like this. People tend to get the wrong message, which is, this is what the expert says, I should follow that. But really what we should be learning for ourselves, and that's perhaps the purpose of this podcast or this particular topic, is really like how we can learn to learn what works for us and really figure out the ways that benefit us, rather than just to rely on those subject matter experts and take them for their word, I suppose.
That's so true, because one thing works for one individual and then another will find that thing really difficult. And I think that's absolutely true. And I think there'll be some themes that I guess might benefit everybody. But I think it's really taking the time to reflect and think about what you need. And, that depends on the individual, and it depends on where we get our energy from. It depends how we recharge. And for some, I've had quite a few friends sort of really do lots of exercise. For them, that's their coping strategy. So they've been going out running and doing this, that, and the other. For others, that's not their coping strategy. And actually they might just rather curl up with a book, or watch some, sort of light TV, whatever. I think it's about listening to what your body needs. It's about listening to what's going to make you happy. And I think just as well, not feeling bad about what you need. You always get those people, I was watching somebody, a great coach friend of mine, I respect her very much, but I was watching her day in the life on Instagram the other day, and it was so, she was so worthy. She'd done her morning yoga, and then she'd had a nutritious smoothie that she made from scratch, and then she'd been for a walk, and then she'd done some professional reading, and they were absolutely great. And whereas for me in the morning, I just want to have a massive cup of tea and sort myself out for the day, and and I do a stretch class one day a week, but hands off, I confess, you won't find me doing yoga on the balcony every morning. And it's just, but it's each to their own, isn't it? And it's respecting, everybody has to find their thing that works for them, and it won't be the same. And she might have a healthy smoothie and I have a big cup of tea, but it's about finding our thing that works, and where we find comfort and what makes us happy. And actually at the moment, I think almost that kind of the most important thing is to do the things that are going to comfort us and make us our best for our, depending on our situation, whether that's for our families or if we're on our own, just for us independently, but finding the things that will make us feel happy and content and sort of cope with everything. I think that's the most important thing.
Yeah, I think you've definitely hit the nail on that. I think what makes I think over time and perhaps maybe over experience as well, we kind of realize that the most important thing is for us to feel comfortable in the things that we do and in the routines that we have, rather than mirror it so much to the people we idolize.
Yeah.
And I think that's a great segue to the first question that I have for you, because
Yeah, for sure.
when we're evaluating our strengths, especially during a crisis like this, when we have time to pause, how should we define our strengths? And the reason I bring this up is because I think you and we had this discussion before. The things that give me strength, I mean, some of it at least, is also something that drains me. So which begs the question if it's actually a strength.
Yeah, no, so it's a really good point. So I will start off with the sort of definition of our strengths, and then we can sort of lead on to the kind of draining thing. So our strengths are they're things that we're good at, things we perform well in. They're also things that energize us. So, for example, if you imagine, we've all got things we can do. So, for example, I can do some Excel spreadsheet analysis. I know how to. I can absolutely get by doing that. I can also stand up and do a training course, in front of lots of people. I can sort of be there facilitating the group and encouraging discussion. I can do both of those things, and actually you'd probably find both of those things on my CV. Right. However, if you were to sort of say, right, today on Monday you're going to spend the whole day doing spreadsheet analysis, and on Tuesday you're going to spend a day facilitating a group. On Monday evening, I would be a little bit forlorn. I'd be probably slightly rocking, and I would be drained. I would be probably feeling a bit grumpy, and I would not be Ellie on fire. I would be like, I've done this analysis, I've got it done. Please don't make me do that too often. If you saw me on the Tuesday evening, I'd probably have a big smile on my face. I'd probably be sort of flushed and happy and chatting to everybody, and you'd probably find me in this slight whirlwind of a room with flip charts everywhere and post-it notes. But what you'd see is sort of me on a good day, and they're both things I can do. So I could say, within my sort of toolkit, my professional toolkit, or on my CV, I can do some analysis and I can do some facilitation. One of those is a clear strength of mine, which is the facilitation, and that's because when I do it, I perform well. And it energizes me. So that kind of feeling of, the day's flown by, I'm buzzing. That's amazing. So that's sort of the principle of our strength. So what's really useful for us to do is to identify what are those things that energize us, and that so for me, I feel like Ellie on a great day. It's finding out what those things are. But to your point about the draining, so no matter how much I love the facilitation, and that day, that Tuesday I described to you, if you said to me, Ellie, next month we're rolling out this new thing at work, what I need you to do is I need you to deliver that training 5 days a week for the whole month, so 20 days back to back of facilitation. Is that okay? Now, the risk there is that what you would do is you would take my energizing strength and you would overplay it. Basically I would have I'd facilitated myself into exhaustion. And by the end of that month, again, I would be able to do it. But what I would find is that my energy levels would be affected. So by the end of the month, I probably wouldn't be loving the facilitation so much. And certainly I would need a break from it. And so I guess it's that principle of find the things you can do them well, and they energize you. But then use them wisely. So use them, and you'll have, that's not my only strength, thankfully, so that I can do some other things that will also energize me. And I think it's about mixing it up so that you're doing different activities that you enjoy, that you perform well at, and they energize you. And we can all do the other things, right? There'll be times I need to do some analysis, and there'll be some times I need to do other things, and almost our competencies or our sort of qualities, the other things we can do, you can still draw on those. But I think it's about making sure, particularly at a time like this, it's really like, let's examine what we're good at, what energizes us, and then look at how we can play to those strengths and how we can draw on them at a time like this to sort of help us through.
Yeah, and you've definitely brought up a good point. And I think the part where I'm going to assume, and I can't say this for certain, of course, is most of us will continue doing the things that that we're good at, but drains us because there's monetary value associated to it, right? And whenever someone is willing to pay you a decent amount of money, it's very easy to forgo the things that we've planned so nicely. Oh, this gives me strength. This is my strength, and it energizes me. This is my strength, and it drains me. But they pay me a lot more, so I'll just get a holiday at the on the back of it. Yeah. And so I suppose the point I'm trying to make is would there be value in doing that and pushing your relaxation time to after all of that? Or is it important to kind of mesh it within those periods where you're actually doing it? If you understand my question.
I do. And it's a really good point. And, and I think it sort of brings us back to the practicalities of life and our careers and our job searches and all of that good stuff. And, you're absolutely right, because if somebody's strengths were all things that you couldn't necessarily apply in a professional workspace, you'd probably have problems. Having said that, though, when I work with people as a coach, and I've sort of used the strengths profile tool on a lot of people, and it's really interesting because I've never yet found anybody who doesn't have some energizing strengths that align to their work. They will have some that do more and some that do less. I think what we have to avoid is if we can avoid doing a role that doesn't have any of our energizing strengths, we will be much happier, we will be more confident, we'll be more resilient, and we'll probably enjoy it more. And I think the strengths do vary. I shared a copy with you of the strengths profile tool, and there's a number of different tools that exist. They are so varied. So it can be things like resilience, but it could also be something like writing. So there's some sort of I guess I'll describe as more behavioural or softer traits, and then some quite practical skills as well, like presentation or something. And I think what's really important for people is to understand the concept and to identify their strengths, and then look at how they can draw on the things they're great at in their role. So just to take an example, you might be in a role that pays well, and you've got certain things you have to deliver, but there could be different ways you could deliver it. So for example, you might have a real strength of so there's one on the strengths profile called spotlight, and that is basically somebody that likes, as it says, somebody who likes to be in the spotlight. So if you're great at spotlight, you love standing on a stage, you love speaking, you're excited by that rather than scared by it. So if you're doing your day job and you have the strength of spotlight, what you could do is draw on that. For example, you go to your team meeting and you know that you're strong at spotlight. So you could use that team meeting as a time to kind of get people on board with your idea, and to sort of, canvass opinion, and to talk with passion about your thing, and to get buy-in. So you might use your strength of spotlight in a meeting to be successful. You could have the exact same job, and that might be not at all your strength, but your strength might be writing, for example. And you might be in the same business setting having to deliver the same things, but if your strength is writing, you could write a really compelling blog or presentation. You could use sort of storytelling, and so if you know that your strength is writing, you would sort of portray your information in a different way. You'd get that buy-in from your teammates in a different way. So I think a lot of it is about understanding your strengths and then using them as your approach to tasks. So you could still be in the same job, and if you knew that you were amazing at writing but you were not energized or good at being in the spotlight, you can sort of approach a task in a different way. So I think it's not as black and white as, oh gosh, I'm weak at my whole job but I'm paid well. I would say you can sort of draw in elements of it and sort of weave in your strengths and sort of adapt how you're doing your role, and that can be really powerful. And actually that's something that I work with people a lot, where they maybe didn't even know that they were great at something because they've always done it. They've always approached a task in a certain way, or the way the company does a particular thing. That's just been how they've always done it. And then they suddenly learn that actually they have a particular strength that they've not used very much. And that's almost your potential, because when you discover these things, it's like, oh, wow, this is a gold mine of things that I never actually realized I was great at, but I could, I could be, could be using them more. So that's a great thing about it as well.
Yeah, that's a good point, and I think it's a great segue to the next question, because say we're aware of what our strengths are, and now we know that it's worth trying to focus those strengths in our current circumstance, be it a job or whatever, or school, or whatever you wanna whatever you're doing. How do we first identify what those strengths are? And
absolutely,
or even confirm what we think our strengths are, because sometimes we could be totally wrong.
So there's I guess there's two different ways you can do this. I suppose the most thorough the way to do it with a small cost investment would be to invest in using one of the online strengths tools. I'm a big fan of Strengths Profile. That's the tool I use and I'm accredited in, but it's not the only one, and I'm not here to be the Strengths Profile salesperson. There is also a similar tool called Strengths Scope. There's another one by Gallup that looks at, I've forgotten the name of their tool, but there's a number of different ones. So lots of different strengths profile tools are available that you can go online, pay a small fee, and you can do a questionnaire. And in about 20 minutes, you get a whizzy report that comes out. And they're really clever as well. You get them out and you're like, oh my goodness, that's me. How did they know? Obviously they know because you just answered the questions. But it's, so that is a great way to get a really up-to-date, accurate sort of, I guess, snapshot of where you are in your life right now, how you're feeling right now, and it takes you through your strengths. So I would say if you have a bit of budget to invest, it's not a lot of money actually. It's so in UK terms it's about £40 sterling. So I guess I'm not very good at my conversion rate, but so
60
it's not,
maybe.
There you go. But 60, 70. But it's a good investment in my opinion. However, if you're not in the position to do that, it's not the priority right now, you can still identify your strengths by doing an exercise and using a few questions. And I've brought that with me if you'd like me to share it, just so people can do it on themselves. So what you have to do is I would recommend you kind of get some quiet space, get a kind of notebook out, however you like to, either on your computer or like if you like to write. I'm like, get my big paper out and brainstorm. But I've got 5 questions that you can reflect on, and the answers will definitely help to draw out some of your key strengths. So the first question to think about is, when has time flown by? So think back to when the day's just gone in a flash, and you've kind of the time's flown by. Think back about what you were doing, and sort of brainstorm that. Write that all down. The second question is to think back about times that you finished a day buzzing and energized. So a little bit like I described that day of facilitation, where you'd kind of find me sort of happy and flushed, and sort of enjoying what I'm doing. So have a think back to to times that you have had a real day where you sort of feel on fire, you're energized, you're buzzing, you're kind of upbeat. And again, think back at what you're actually doing and brainstorm, sort of write down all those things. Another question, the third one, is to think about what your friends tell you that you're good at. And people probably will do this already, but if they don't, it's okay. Go and ask your friends. Just go and sort of sample a few of your sort of people you trust, people that care about you, and maybe people from different walks of life. So it might be kind of your oldest friend, but maybe also your friend from work, a friend you studied with or whatever. But just ask a sample of your friends, when they think about you, what are the things that you're great at? And again, brainstorm those down. And fourth question, similar actually, along the same lines, what do people come to you for? So there'll always be things where, like I go to one of my friends for cakes. I go to another of my friends for like a really honest opinion. But that we all have friends we go to for different things because we know that they kind of get it or they're good at that particular thing. So have a think about when you get those kind of texts, people going, can I just pick your brains on something? Or can you help me? Can you have a look at my CV for me? Or, whatever it is for you, note down on your brainstorm, what do people come to you for? And then final question 5, when are you at your happiest? And that can be at work, especially if you're trying to find these strengths in relation to your sort of professional life. But actually, I think it's really useful to also think about your life. Because our strengths, it's not like you have a work life and a home life in the strengths world. It's it's actually all very interchangeable, and we can play on our strengths all the time. So think about when you're happy at home and in life, and again, brainstorm it down. And with all of these, what I would suggest is, as well as just sort of saying, I was happy when I was, running a meeting, think in a bit more detail and say, well, what was it? What was it about that? Was it, well, I was on my feet and I was in front of an audience. I was in control of a flip chart pen, whatever it was that you kind of think, well, what were the things that I loved about it? And you're really delving into the detail, and then look back at those 5 brainstormed answers. And what I think you'll probably find is some key themes that come out of there. So your friends are probably going to be coming to you for the things that you're great at and that energize you, because they'll see you at your best when you're doing them, and they'll kind of come and draw on your input. So try that, and what you'll find is you'll get there absolutely some of your energizing strengths, and that's a great way to sort of reflect on it as a starting point.
Right. Yeah, those are very helpful, and I want to delve into some of these questions if you don't mind.
Mm-hmm.
And perhaps it's I don't know if it's a controversial question, but I think, like, for example, when are you at your happiest? So I would imagine some people are at their happiest when they're doing absolutely nothing. So if that counts as their strength, if that counts as their strengths, does that mean they should try to involve more downtime within their day, or is it just good to know? I'm curious.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point, actually, and absolutely there will be people like that. The funny thing is, there'll also be people. I was talking to my very best friend yesterday, and she's just had an operation, and she's bedridden with her knee all strapped up. And my view was like, oh my gosh, not you're lucky that you've had an operation, but I was like, oh my gosh, you can just read books and you can watch box sets. That's amazing. And she was like, no. I'm really frustrated. I just want to be doing things. I'm not happy unless I'm doing things. And it's really interesting because you might be like, oh, it's a no-brainer to you. Like, well, I'm at my happiest when I'm just vegging out and I'm chilled. For other people, that is really draining for them, and they almost feel a bit like, some people are just they get their energy from doing. So even that itself is really useful to know, because if you identify the fact that, you have a real strength, and I guess it's not just a case of I was doing nothing. It's almost like, okay, tell me more about the nothing you were doing. And actually what you might find is that you were, it was quiet, for example, or you might say, well, I was doing nothing, but I was watching TV or I was reading. I think it's almost kind of delve into when you say you were doing nothing, what specifically, were you staring out the window? Well, were you thinking, was that you were doing nothing, but actually you were letting your thoughts wander, and that's when you become really creative? Or, so I would say, yes, doing nothing, but then doing nothing in what way? Were you sort of, just staring, or were you thinking, or were you, whatever? So I would say delve into that in a little bit more detail, and and then within that you'll get some clues. So tell me, so take that example. If you say you were at your happiest when you were doing nothing, tell me more about you at your happiest doing nothing. What does that involve?
I think you've already highlighted what it is, and I think for me the times where I do nothing and I feel really energized and in some ways accomplished is when I let my mind wander, and and it really allows me the opportunity to be creative, but also to slowly, because whenever I'm in my routine and I plan things, I'm very bad at it because I don't like to plan. But when I allow my time, when I allow myself to wander and those creative thoughts come about,
Mhm.
the plan forms in my mind of like what I want to do, and it kind of sets the path for me. And I
Mhm.
suppose and I'm really glad that you brought it up because it's such a good point that what exactly we're doing with that nothing time. But that's my example, and
Mhm. Mhm.
and I'm starting to appreciate that. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's actually where it sort of first thought you might go, well, I was doing nothing. Actually, you were doing nothing, yes, in terms of actual physical activity, but actually what you were doing is allowing yourself some time and space. So you were reflecting. You were I know I'm quite good at, I'll brainstorm and do all this stuff, but actually some of my best thoughts come later. So I'll kind of wander around and then, or I'll go to sleep, or, and something random will pop into my head. And it's almost like my brain's had to do a bit of processing, and different people process and think and create in different ways. So you're doing nothing. Actually, probably what you're doing was sort of just allowing your mind to wander. And actually, there's lots of sort of writing now that suggests that in order to be creative, people need to just slow down and stop doing, because everybody now, there's those stats, aren't there, about we check our phones every 24 seconds, or whatever the number is. And actually, if you think back to sort of years gone by before the fact we did everything on our phones, there would be times we'd just kind of stop and look out the window and just like veg out, not just scrolling, but actually just being. And that kind of that creative space, for many is lost, because when they do nothing, actually they're lying on their sofa just scrolling through Instagram, or whatever it is, and then they're not having that thinking time.
Right. I'm really glad you brought this up, Ellie, because now I'm starting to think like maybe the word nothing should be eradicated from my
Yeah.
vocabulary, because it's almost like a societal structure based on my education, right? Where
Mm.
things that don't contribute to what is required of me automatically is assumed to be nothing. And so
Yeah.
I think I evaluate it as such, but in truth it's not nothing. It's
Mm.
probably nothing to people who do not see the value in it. And so
Mm.
hence is worth, not even not even thinking of the
Yeah.
word nothing.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And also your point there about sort of almost kind of how you've been brought up, or your kind of background. I think also it depends on who you've been brought up by. So I think back to my father. He was, he would be like a real early riser. He was had lots of interests, lots of things on the go. And he was really like of the view that if you didn't get up early in the morning and get on with things, you were sort of a bit of a good for nothing layabout. It's kind of, he used to come and like vacuum the floor outside mine and my sister's bedroom at like 7 a.m. if we hadn't got up yet, and very cruel. But because he was sort of very much of a view that it's good to get up early and start the day and all that. And that and that worked for him, and that was his real passion. It's really interesting because today I'm sort of a different opinion, and I'm like, I think that sometimes, if your body needs to rest, you need to take the rest. And that's not about being lazy or non-focused. I think it's just about recognizing that everyone has productivity in their own way and at different times. And sort of coming back to the strengths, the strengths profile, it's about that thing about knowing what is best for you. When will you be at your best? When will you be energized? When will you be performing well? And whereas, for my dad, that might have been about, sort of up doing something at 6 a.m. For somebody else, that isn't, that isn't going to be great for them. But actually, they might be a real night owl, and they're writing their book at night, or, whatever it is. And I think different people have different strengths, and I think it's about acknowledging that's good. We're all different, and we just need, I think for us, we all need to just find out what works for us. And if for you, sort of sometimes lying on the sofa, just letting your mind wander, that's not lazy, or that's not doing nothing. Even if my dad might have thought so, actually what that is that's you taking some time, and you sort of letting your thoughts, percolate, and you'll come up with some great ideas, or just resting. I think at the moment more than ever, that's one of the things we need to do, is just allow ourselves some time to just go, just breathe.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, before I get to the next question, my humble apologies for harping on this question, but you brought up uh, the point about your friend suddenly being bedridden after an operation.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, like, when people are stopped in their tracks just like that, and they can no longer do the things that they consider their strengths, how should they be thinking about readjusting the way they either think or the things that they do, in order to, because we don't always have the luxury of doing the things we want to be doing all the time.
Of course, no, we don't. And I obviously, she's my best friend, so I obviously told her off and told her she had to rest and get better.
Good advice. Yes.
She was a bit grumpy with me, but no, it's a really good point. And I think taking her as an example, then she cannot physically get up and dash around at the moment to do the things she wants to do that energize her. But from her perspective, I think what's important is almost, her to think about her other strengths. Okay, so yes, one of her energizing strengths would be she's probably, if I looked at her profile report, she's probably got very strong drive, very strong sort of action focus, so she wants to do those things. She's also strong at some other things. So for example, she's great at writing. Okay, so she has a real strength in that as well. So right now she can't do the things that are her go-to time fillers, but she can, so she doesn't have to do, so she finds it hard to do nothing, as a little bit like you described, because she said her mind wanders a lot, but not always in a healthy way. So she'll almost kind of, what some people can do with sort of thoughts wandering is they can catastrophize, and they could almost kind of go down rabbit holes that aren't very positive and helpful. And if that's you, probably for you, it isn't good to just sit and let your mind wander. You might benefit from something more structured. So for her, what she could do in this time, and actually this is something that she's doing, is she's doing some journaling, and she, and that's something she's good at doing. It's helpful to her, and it's a way to almost stop the sort of the mind wandering off on the negative thoughts. And she's sort of using that to do, so she's sort of doing some writing, she's doing some other stuff, and she'll have lots of things she's good at. And really the principle that I'm getting across there is almost that when you're stopped in your tracks and you can't do your go-to energizing strengths, think about what are some of your maybe lesser used strengths, and how can you draw on some of those. And so one of the things I love about the strengths profile report, which is the Capfinity product, which I use, I like that more than the others, because one of the things they do is they break out your strengths into 2 settings. I'll just show you the summary here. You basically, your strengths come out, and you get your realized strengths here, which are the things that we know about. So they're your things you perform well. They're things that energize you, and you're using them all the time. They also highlight this other set, which is called your unrealized strengths. And these are things that you perform well in, and they energize you, but you're not using them as much. And that can be partly because maybe your job isn't giving you that opportunity at the moment. So take my facilitation thing. If I had a job where I just never got the chance to do that, it would just sit there as an untapped strength. But sometimes it can be that we don't even know that we have that strength. And they're the things that I mentioned earlier that almost are your kind of gold mine of potential that you can draw on. And in a situation where you find yourself not being able to tap into all those things you normally do and you do all the time, it's a great chance to kind of say, well, let's look at the things that I'm good at and that will energize me, but I haven't been doing them for whatever reason. And there might be, so one of mine is about mission. And that, I guess probably just because I'm always sort of I'm quite busy and quite focused. I'm quite a doer. So one of the things I do all the time is I'm always in action. I'm always off connecting people and networking, and I'm quite competitive. I'm quite, I'm kind of just on and doing stuff. So actually, I rarely would sit down and go, I'm going to just take some time to really work on what my bigger picture, what's my mission, what's important to me. Now, if I get stuck in bed after an operation and I cannot go out and I can't be, out doing things, I can't be doing tasks, that might be a great time for me to say, actually, I'm going to invest some time in something that I know that I'll be good at it, and I know that it'll energize me. I just haven't focused on it before.
Got it. And you mentioned our realized strengths and our unrealized strengths.
Mm-hmm.
How do we prevent ourselves from exploiting it or overusing it to the point where or is it even the case where we might be drained by them or find it no longer our strength?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a real risk, actually. And I think that's why it's useful to actually really understand your strengths and kind of become familiar with them and actually be a little bit more aware of them. Because one of the bits of advice that you get from, the strengths profile is to use your strengths wisely. And a little bit like my example I gave you earlier about if you, I love facilitation, but if I had to do it every day for a month, I'd become a bit tired of it and drained by it. It's important that we use our strengths wisely and we don't overdo them, because actually, what can happen is an overdeveloped strength can actually become a weakness. So I don't know if you think about a person, for example, that's sort of really passionate and really energetic, up to a point, that's great, because they'll kind of, people will admire them, they'll take people with them. That you kind of, oh gosh, they've always got such energy and drive and they achieve so much, all positive things. After a while, the risk is if they did that all the time and never stopped, firstly, they'd get physically tired, but also they'd get really annoying. And I think there's a bit of self-awareness required in this as well, because I think anything that can be a real energizing strength, by the nature of our energy around it, our passion for it, and our frequency of doing it, we need to make sure that we don't go overboard and sort of do it all the time, because actually in the sort of language of strengths profile, it can actually drop out of your strength. So if I was to sort of they recommend you redo your profile from time to time, sort of, maybe every 6 months to a year or something. And I'm due to do mine again soon, actually. I haven't done it in over a year, and I was like, I really want to see how it's changed actually after the last 6 months, which has been a bit bonkers. The other quadrants on it, one of the things, it can drop right down and go into their learned behaviors. And they're the things, if you think back to the example I gave you at the beginning of the spreadsheet. So the analysis, the Excel spreadsheet analysis for me would be an example of a learned behavior, which is something I can do. I can perform well in it, but it de-energizes me. And so, what we need to make sure is that we kind of protect our strengths and use them wisely, and sort of use them an appropriate amount and not sort of spoil them, not do it so much that we kind of just, you get to the point where, and it's almost like that burnout point, actually. And I think back, in my own career, I think there's times when I've probably burnt out some of my strengths because they're things I'm great at and enjoy, but I've just done them too much. And, I was a headhunter for 11 years and I loved it. But it got to a point where I just went, I need a change. I need a break from this. And I think probably some of it now, knowing what I know about strengths, I look back and I think probably I probably overdid some of those things, just needed to step away.
Yeah. And that makes sense. And as you said that, I start to think of examples of what that looks like in real life. And one that comes to mind are those celebrities like musicians and stuff, like the Justin Biebers, the Britney Spears, who just after a while, who after being exploited for their talent, they just lose it because it no longer interests them and they can't perform. But because, if they stay out of the game, people forget them and they worry that they no longer have that star factor. They stick in it and they just become so mentally drained at least, or at worst, have mental health issues.
That's such a good point. And gosh, I would love to do Britney's strengths profile with her. You just think, for somebody like that is so, so she must have spotlight as one of her energizing strengths. She absolutely must, because she's at, you sort of look back to earlier in her career and see her, when sort of eyes are on her, and that must have been something, I'm sure, along with lots of different strengths. But that's the risk, isn't it? Is if you do it day in, day out, and actually that is such a that kind of career is sort of so high pressure. I guess it's different to sort of your normal person that works in an office doing something. It's like, I think it's probably easier to adapt our day jobs when you work in, like as a marketing manager or as a HR manager. It's probably easier to draw on different bits of your strength. Whereas if your job is you have to go on stage in front of thousands of people and perform, and very high energy day in, day out. You can't say, oh, tonight I just want to do nothing. I just want to lie on the sofa, and actually maybe that may be what they need. And it's probably a lot easier when you're in a sort of a more, a sort of more your average sort of person's career job to actually sort of stop and reflect and adapt. I think when you have a job that it's so in the public domain and it's so high intensity and so sort of all eyes are on you, I think it must be really hard. And actually, it's, when you say it like that, it's unsurprising that people that have all eyes on them could get drained, because they probably need time to go and use some of their other strengths. And people like that will also have strengths in areas that are nothing to do with being a singer. She might take Britney, just to carry on the example. She might be amazing at kind of planning and organizing. That might be a real strength of hers, and she actually would really love to do it, but she probably in her world probably doesn't get that much chance to do it, because she probably has a team that would do all that stuff for her, and so maybe for her she wouldn't get the chance to use those sort of skill sets like we might do in in a normal office job. So it's really interesting to think about it, and I would absolutely love to. I'd love to do one of my strengths profile sessions with her. If you know her, if you could arrange that for
me. I'll try. Yeah, I've
she's listening.
I don't mean to burst your bubble. I've DM'd a few celebrities. None of them have replied, so I won't be holding my breath. Because I tell you what, though, I was just speaking with my wife, and my dream guest on this podcast is actually Russell Brand. So,
oh wow,
yeah. So at some point, by hook or by crook, I'm just gonna I would love to.
We should both tweet him and see if he replies.
Yeah, see if he replies. Yeah, but I mean, you were mentioning it in your answer just now, but I just so that we can confirm it, like, how often should we be evaluating our strengths?
Yeah, so in terms of the formal tools, their recommendation is sort of every 6 months onwards, it's worth retaking it. Now, I'm sure there's a commercial element to that, where they probably, of course, they'd love everybody to do their tool lots. So my personal view is, I think if you've been through a particular change, it's a useful time to reevaluate. And that's what I was saying. I think I'm going to do mine again soon, just to see if it's evolved at all. And that's because since I last did it, I've internationally relocated. Obviously, we've all had the crazy times with sort of the global pandemic, but I've also set up my business here in Singapore, and I've been through quite a few sort of life changes, and I think it would just be really interesting to see how that's impacted on it. I think if you're in the same role you were in a year ago, you wouldn't necessarily have seen any major shifts in it. So I don't think you need to kind of do it every 6 months. But I think the kind of the sort of self-reflection, though, I think is an important thing to do, sort of just from time to time on an ongoing basis. So I'm not talking about going and do it, paying for an online questionnaire. I'm just thinking more about, the examples of some of those questions I gave. And I think almost if people are listening and they're doing this, I think it's useful just to take time to reflect. So for example, if they do a project or an activity and they find themselves really buzzing and really energized, is maybe just to pause and kind of go, oh, that's really interesting, I'm just noticing that in myself, that I've this has been something that's really the day has flown by, I'm feeling really energized. It's probably worth just pausing and going back to your brainstorming and kind of going, what specifically were the things that I was doing? So, not just saying, oh, I was running a training course, but also within that, within what was I doing? Well, I was standing in front of the group, or I was asking questions, or actually it was more like I was drawing others, I was drawing things out of other people. So it was less about training, it was more about facilitation. But I would just kind of, from time to time, when you spot something that really affects you, either positively with that sort of energy, but I guess on the other side as well, it could be useful if you, and we could all do that right now, couldn't we? If you find yourself feeling quite drained, and now's a great example of that time, it's also useful to just sit and reflect and get your journal out, or your notebook, whatever works for you, but actually just to say, what is it that I've been doing, and specifically within that, what is it that's drained me? And I know, I had a very draining time, as I'm sure did many million of people around the world, doing the whole combining homeschooling with trying to set up a business and work and network and life stuff, and some of that was really draining. And it's like, was it just draining because we were all juggling lots of stuff, perhaps? Or was this, were there some other things in there that caused it to be draining? And, from my point of view, was it because I was really having to draw on a lot of my learned behaviors and bringing out my toolkit of things that I can do but aren't energizing me? And I think it's just interesting to think about it in that way. And you'll probably get some nuggets of sort of information about yourself that you can sort of clock and use for the future.
Got it. Good to know. So really just like when we experience big changes, is worth a chance to reevaluate and see what has changed. So I want to sort of end this off. I want to ask two questions that are not related to the strengths, but more about you. One is a reflective question, and one is a little bit more about you and how people can find you. So the first one is, what life lesson has taken you the longest to learn?
Oh gosh. Okay. And I'm sure there's more than one. One that really stands out to me is that just because you're good at something does not mean it's good for you. And I sort of look back at my life. I mentioned earlier I was a headhunter for 11 years, and I was good at it. And that's not me showing off. I was good at it, based on my, my revenue, based on my reputation. And for a long time I loved it. But in the end, I realized that just because you're sort of doing something you're great at doesn't always mean it's great for you. And I think there's a little bit in there, as I mentioned earlier, about kind of making sure that you're not overdoing your strengths. And I think probably I did overdo some of my strengths, and I probably just overdid some of my I overdid my drive and my competitive elements. And I think I just worked so hard for so long that I reached a point that I just went, enough. Enough now. And I'm going to let other people take on the headhunting of HR leaders in the UK now.
Yeah, that's such a powerful lesson for all of us. What's good for us, it's not necessarily what we're good at is not necessarily what's good for us.
Exactly that. And sort of, I guess I learned that. I learned that just. It sort of hit me about 5 years ago when I set up my business, because I just kind of realized I had to stop. And I kind of reached a point where I was like, actually, I recognize in my body and my soul, I was like, enough, I need to do something different now. But now seeing it through the lens of strengths, it's become so clear to me that I sort of just, I thought, oh, well, I'm just tired, and I think there was a bit of burnout in there, when now I look back. But I think some of it was just, I was doing too much of the things that I was good at, to the extent that it just, it's just like I've overdone them, and they've gone down into my toolkit, but they're not the things that are energizing me anymore.
Yeah, that's so true. And final question, since and you mentioned you've started your business in Singapore, but
Yeah.
what is it? Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about it, and more importantly, if people are interested, how can they reach you?
Thank you. Yeah, no, that's great. So about 5 years ago now, I set up my own business, and I do two key things. I work as a coach, so my business is called the Recruitment Coach, and that's me. And I work as a coach supporting individuals who are transitioning, and that may be in their job or their career, but it might be in other areas as well. I often work with people who've transitioned country, having done that myself a few times now. That coaching piece is kind of my main focus and a real passion. The other bit I do is consulting work, and I work as a consultant helping organizations improve their recruitment. So they're my kind of my two focus areas. And I have my UK company, which is all ticking along, and I still work with some people back in the UK, but also I am now the Recruitment Coach Limited company here in Singapore as well. And people can find me in a number of different ways. I'm a big social media fan, so I'm on Instagram, Ellie Rich-Poole, and I'm on LinkedIn, Ellie Rich. Also, and that's my name. And I'm on Twitter, although it's not my favorite. I'm on Facebook, and actually, if I may extend an invitation to anyone listening, I do have a Facebook group which is full of lots of free tips and coaching exercises, and a lovely community of really positive and supportive people. And some of those are people that are looking for a new role, but some are people that are just looking for inspiration and sort of coaching questions and that sort of positive community. So we could perhaps pop a link to the group there, and anyone's really welcome to join and sort of get involved with that community as well.
Absolutely. All the links will be in the description of the podcast.
Fabulous.
So no issues there. Ellie, thank you so much for our conversation. It was really insightful, and I learned a lot about myself too. I mean, specifically with the doing nothing part, and also how more importantly, how to make sure I don't exploit my strengths so that I can preserve its longevity.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Nick. It's been an absolute pleasure. I've really enjoyed talking to you, and and it was really interesting as well. We all keep learning all the time, don't we? So it's all good to reflect and have a chat like this. So thank you.
Awesome, thanks.